Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rental Housing Association of Washington's podcast, Housing Matters. I am once again your host, Cory Brewer. I am the External Affairs Manager for RHA. Just want to say thank you to everyone who has been listening to our first two episodes of the show. We've had a lot of feedback and a lot of people listening and viewership on YouTube, so I just want to say thank you very much for everybody who has tuned into that. If you missed our last episode, it's available anywhere you can find podcasts or on RHA's YouTube page. And in that episode, I interviewed two local rental housing providers in King County, as well as the tenant landlord attorney, and we talked about the current state of evictions in King County. In this week's episode, I am speaking with Cory Brewer. Yes, another Cory, just without the E, like in my name with E. He is Vice President of Residential Operations for Windermere Property Management, Gill and Associates. He oversees leases and management agreements, as well as functioning as a primary point of contact for property managers and leasing agents. We conducted our interview on site at Cory's office in Bellevue, and our conversation mainly covers the current state of eviction safety for property management companies, but also tenant safety in that same respect. Cory oversees mostly properties in the King County metro area, and an increasing issue is the safety of those living in these communities when you have a disruptive resident. What can be done if another resident is a constant problem to their neighbors? We also touch on predictions for the short-term future of the rental housing market and availability of that housing. Well, Cory Brewer, thank you so much for joining Housing Matters, the Rental Housing Association of Washington podcast today. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Would you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up and went to school and all that?
Yeah, very, very exciting story. I'm a Seattle area native. I've lived in King County my whole life. Born in Seattle, raised on the east side, moved back into Seattle to go to school at UW, and then now I live back on the east side.
All right, so Husky, okay.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about the recent Apple Cup game there?
Oh, it was too close, but worked out.
I'm a kook, so that was a little heartbreaking, but honestly, I thought we were going to lose by 20, so the fact that it was that close, I guess it kind of made me more mad, but we hung in there, so that's okay. Have you always worked in the real estate sphere? Or did you start doing something else?
Yeah, I mean, just normal high school jobs, but professionally, I got right into real estate right before I graduated, actually.
Oh, all right, yeah.
In fact, I did not walk at UW graduation.
You did?
That was a Saturday.
Uh-huh.
I think I started that day, not because whatever was going on that day was super important, but the valedictorian, or the person giving the graduation speech, she was a writer for the UW Daily. Did not care for her.
Okay.
Didn't really want to go listen to her talk for an hour. That was part of it.
Fair enough. Protest.
Yeah.
Okay.
With my feet. I voted with my feet.
I thought you were going to tell me you were holding an open house or something like that.
Well, I might have been. Yeah.
I like the protest, though. That's good. And so starting in real estate, how did you kind of progress to where you are today?
Yeah. The reason I chose real estate, it's not what my family background was in at all. But my dad gave me some advice that I really appreciated. It was talking about, okay, you're looking at your career path, and if you don't want to be relocated someday by whatever company you work for, and figure out where they're headquartered, you might end up in North Dakota, Minnesota.
Sure.
I knew I didn't want that, and so I knew I wanted to focus on something local, and you can't get much more local than real estate.
Absolutely.
And so that's what drew me in. I was a sales broker for about 8 or 9 years. I ended up in a place where, even though I was one of the younger people in the office, I was one of the people who was there most often. Like, a lot of realtors just hang their license and aren't very actively engaged in the business. I definitely was. And I found that people started kind of coming to me for advice or double check things. I saw the way that my manager was running the office, and I was like, okay, I really want to do that. Like, I want to run the team. And I got an opportunity to do that in 2009, 2010.
Excellent.
But we kind of quickly shifted into the market downturn at the time.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people left the industry, and a lot of offices closed. The office that I was managing closed. And I had an opportunity to go back to my old office and go back to sales, but I found that I really liked being the team leader, basically.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, here at this company, Windermere Property Management, while the real estate sales market was declining, the rental and leasing and management market was still growing, and they were in a build mode at the time, which was very interesting to me.
When in downturn, that's to be
during a real estate downturn, this company was still in growth mode, and we haven't looked back.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about that time period too, my background, I grew up. My parents are small landlords. My mom's in real estate, and my dad's been a mortgage lender for almost 20 years. But in that downturn, they both stayed in the business, but his company got bought out, and then like 2 years later got bought out by somebody else again. And then he ended up with the company he's still with now. But
he didn't get relocated to North Dakota?
He did not. No, he moved from Puyallup to Tacoma. So I think he was okay with that. But no, they did not send him anywhere else.
Nothing bad about North Dakota, by the way.
No.
I've never been there, though.
It's
far.
I visited the University of North Dakota in high school. I was considering going there for. That's my only trip there. That's my only North Dakota story. But
all right, so he's still doing his thing.
He's still doing his thing. Yeah. It's been an interesting, as I'm sure. Obviously, you're in the business as well. So it's been an interesting last couple of years since the rates have gone up and all that. But from a property management side, have you guys seen growth in the sector even with kind of the economic downturn? Okay. So same play out as before.
Yeah, I mean maybe for different reasons, and we can get into that a little bit. But yes, the short answer is yes.
Yeah. Okay, so all the recent rental housing legislation, whether that be local or state level from Olympia, have you noticed a large decline in rental housing across the Puget Sound region as a whole?
Decline in supply or decline in quality?
I guess both. Yeah.
Okay. Well, not in supply.
Okay.
Now, I don't think the supply is necessarily tied. There's so many factors.
Absolutely.
The world is a complicated place.
Yes.
What we are seeing in our market, which is primarily single-family houses, there's a lot of people out there who are going to hang on to their 2.65% interest rate.
Right.
And maybe not a good time for them to sell that house for various reasons in addition to that. So they give us a call and we put it into the rental pool.
Yep.
So we are seeing more houses available than what would be seasonally normal right now.
Okay.
So from the supply side, we definitely have that.
Accidental landlords.
I think that will run its course. And then in the apartment market, it depends what story you read, but whether construction is up or halted or they're going to convert office buildings into apartments. I don't keep a super close eye on that, but people are still moving to the Seattle area every single day and they need somewhere to live. So the supply, I think, is good for renters right now. That's good. Pricing hasn't come down that much. Maybe people they want to hang on a little longer until they start dropping.
Sure.
They can handle a little vacancy on the front end. I don't know exactly what everybody's in a unique situation. The quality of housing, or the type of housing.
Yep.
I think you can start to tie this back to legislation because the interest rates are going to do what they're going to do and the market is going to react. But I think we have some pretty strong evidence prior to interest rates jumping to 7 and 8%, what the housing market was doing in response to legislation. And the Seattle RRIO numbers tell that story pretty clearly.
Very much.
Where the number of units stayed relatively flat over it was like a 2-year period.
Yeah.
But if you look at the number of 3 and 4 and more bedroom units versus 0 and 1 bedroom units, there's a big change there.
Yep.
And the way that database measures things is all of those are considered one unit. So a studio apartment is one housing unit, and a 6-bedroom, 10,000 square foot house is one housing unit.
I did not know that. Okay.
Right? They're all it's one unit.
One unit,
They look at unit count and property type.
Okay.
Unit count stayed relatively the same. Property type, there was a major shift, and we have a lot of 3 and 4 bedroom houses coming out of the rental pool being backfilled by studio and 1 bedroom apartments, and people at the Housing Justice Project will tell you, well, there's no problem with supply because look at the unit count.
Yeah.
We're good on unit count, but that doesn't help,
People with families.
a household of 5 or 6 people. They can't live in a studio.
Right.
And where we see it a lot on the single family end is these larger families that are also subsidy voucher holders.
Sure.
Right. They have a limited choices to begin with. And that's great and everything that this new tower is being built with a bunch of studio apartments.
Right.
But we need a 4-bedroom house on a voucher in Renton, and there's none available anymore. So thanks for doing all this and pushing out the houses and filling it back with 1-bedroom apartments. Right. A lot of people don't need that.
The statistics look good when you talk about the units, but the actual people it affects. And I think that goes into the construction of new homes too. I mean, nobody's building the starter family house because it's not profitable.
No, the dirt is too expensive.
Yeah. And I think that's unfortunately going to be a continuing issue. And I don't know. I mean, spur investment and
well, they can. There is a way to the neighborhood I live in. I see a lot of this going on. 100-year-old house.
Sure.
Grandma finally has to move off to the retirement home, and then they sell the house.
Yep.
And one of two things can happen. It's a little rambler, and you're gonna lose a ton of money if you try to replace it with a rambler, right?
Yep.
So you're gonna come in and you're gonna build a 5,000 square foot house as a builder because that's the only way you're gonna make a profit on this project because the land was so expensive. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, now with the zoning changes, maybe they can put a nice looking triplex that still kind of fits the character of the neighborhood. And I think that is going to be a good way to kind of chip away at this problem.
Okay.
Build up a little bit as opposed to out.
Sure.
You can still put 3 bedrooms in a unit. So I'm encouraged what I see there. Trick is going to be more cars, more parking.
Sure.
That I think is the key challenge there. But yeah, there are ways to attack the problem that don't involve, manhandling the landlord-tenant relationship. That's not necessarily the target that needs to be approached. So I don't think.
We can get more into kind of specifics and some follow-up questions, but if you would, kind of the 30,000-foot view of the current state of tenant safety and the uptick in dangerous evictions in Washington State.
Yeah. Fortunately, I've not been a part of any of those firsthand, at least not recently. There have been some stories in the news, though. And it's not just Seattle, but it's definitely happening more often than I can ever remember happening before. And I mean, we manage roughly 2,000 doors here. And most years, if I hear about 2 or 3 evictions happening over the course of a year, that's like a busy year.
Okay.
For eviction.
Like
it's like never, it's unheard. We just don't encounter that. Last couple of years, it's 8 or 10 going at any given time, which out of a couple thousand it's not much.
Sure.
But compared to what we've been used to, it's crazy. It's out of control. How many of those people are dangerous? I don't think we really know. But, we've seen signs of certain types of behavior that definitely give us pause.
Sure.
And, I was talking to one of our agents who's a female, and the tenant was a male. He lived in a condo unit that was kind of down at the end of a hall. You got to turn a corner to get there. It's pretty far from the stairwell, pretty far from the elevator. And I remember like it was yesterday. It was probably 6 months ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. She just told me, Cory, I don't feel comfortable walking down that hallway. because I don't have an escape route. And not that this guy ever did anything to her, but like some of the signs were kind of there.
Yep.
And we just all agreed, like, there's no way she's walking up to that door without a police officer by her side. And it just, like, those kind of things are a little more top of mind now.
Sure. So you say more recently, do you think this was kind of trending this way before the pandemic, or kind of a product of the pandemic, do you think?
I definitely would lean toward product of. We just have the table's been set for people to break the rules and not have to worry about it.
Yeah, very much so. So with that, in your professional capacity, you just spoke about how you had to send a police officer. Have you really had to pivot your overall business in any large sense at all?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is, well, there's a couple things. There's the service of notices, which is kind of on hyperdrive, and I think unnecessarily. But that kind of, in combination with just the overall nature of, I think it's really unfortunate that the landlord-tenant relationship has been set up to become more and more and more confrontational.
Absolutely.
And it never used to be that way. Like,
no.
we used to talk to people and work stuff out, Yep. Not necessarily that it was a handshake agreement. Like, you still have to sign contracts and everything. But I feel like it can and should be a lot more friendly, a lot more of a partnership. We should be able to trust each other.
Absolutely.
And we're definitely going down a road where things have to be a lot more formal. The paper trail is key. It's always been key, but it's even more so now. You make one little mistake, you have to start over completely. And where we used to just maybe a phone call is now someone walking up to your door with a scary looking piece of paper. But if we don't do that, we set ourselves up for failure in the future. So we have to take this more formal routine.
Make sure your bases are covered.
Yeah, and so that's probably the biggest shift that I've seen.
All right. So you mentioned serving notices, and that obviously being a big safety factor. And I believe you've spoken about this at the state level.
I've spoken to members of the legislature privately.
Yes.
This is not something I've testified about yet, but I'm very much looking forward to it. Yeah.
Beautiful. And were those conversations, do you think, constructive? Were they receptive? Or was it kind of just, hey, thanks for coming by?
It seems like it's being received well.
Okay.
And there's basically, I think there's about 3 key points that I'm trying to make about this. Of course, safety is a factor. Why? I mean, there's a piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
Why do I have to drive across town and walk it up to someone's door who might be in a bad mood that day?
Right. Sure.
Right. Why do I have to do that? Why can't I mail it? Why can't I email it? So there is definitely a safety factor. There have been a couple stories in the news recently about gunfire as a result of these confrontational meetings between people. But I think in Washington State particularly, there has been a resonant point to be made with the environmental impact. I think that's a big one, because we're printing a lot of paper and we're burning a lot of fuel driving it around. And as is often the case with landlord-tenant legislation, I think a lot of it is built specifically with apartment buildings in mind. And maybe it's not that big of a deal to print off a sheet of paper and walk it down the hall to unit 205.
Right.
But if I have to drive from Bellevue to Auburn, that makes a difference. And then multiply that by however many rentals there are throughout the state. That's a lot. So the environmental, the safety factor, and then I think privacy is another issue too. If I was on the receiving end of something like that, I don't really want my neighbors knowing my business. If I'm not home, they tack it to the door.
Absolutely. I hadn't even really thought about that.
It's kind of intrusive,
yeah.
And so one of the people I was talking with, who is a member of the House of Representatives and a realtor, she's like, well, this is crazy because I can sell a house without ever printing a sheet of paper or holding a pen. Yep. Why can't you lease a house or renew a lease, right? So that's the direction we're trying to take this.
Okay. Yeah. So regarding, you just talked about running the paper everywhere and having to go all over the state to drop stuff off. If you were to kind of a pipe dream, if you were able to draft a kind of tenant protection bill for helping to remove dangerous tenants for the safety of the other residents, and then also something of an electronic notices bill, kind of what would your vision be for those two things?
I don't know that I've given too much thought to the safety aspect of it, but how I would introduce it, and I've taken a stab at editing the applicable RCW, and I sent it off to the powers that be. But I would just make it an opt-in. You're not supposed to be taking anyone's rights away, and I don't think that that's the way that I would draft it. You can do A, B, C, or D. Right? And this is a new option, D. And in your lease, you could give your tenant the choice to check a box and say, yes, I want to opt into electronic delivery, which I think the overwhelming majority of people would do because they would rather receive an email than having something stuck to their door.
100%.
And now people get to choose how they want to communicate. And it's also not the Stone Ages anymore.
I know you think about everything you can do digitally, and as you said, when you buy a house, and if you still want to buy a house with paper documents, you most certainly can. But you have to do exactly what you just said. You sign the electronic disclosure agreement, and you send all your stuff, and it's not a big deal, and you can buy a house that way. So why not this? You mentioned when we spoke last week, you had just taken a call with Renting in Seattle to discuss. I believe it was tenant safety, but it may have also been notices. I don't recall from our conversation. But would you mind just maybe elaborating a little bit on what you spoke about and if they were receptive or how kind of that went?
Yeah, I'll try not to give too much detail, but it's one of the handful of evictions that we have going right now. It's a non-payment case, but it has evolved into a behavioral case as well. And the tricky part that I've encountered so far is that we've got the non-payment eviction going, and of course the timeline on that is
I want to ask you about that in a minute.
We're gonna eat up the better part of a year on this from start to finish. In the meantime, we've got behavioral issues, and we could compromise our non-payment case by issuing new behavior notices because it would be too confusing. Your dog is not supposed to be pooping in the elevator, and you're supposed to be paying. Is that confusing? I don't know. Apparently, that's very confusing. Very confusing, apparently. But anyway, so I was really talking about what are my options to take some kind of different action outside of the, standing eviction that we're working on, and I guess the positive takeaway is that nobody's going to do anything unless someone files a complaint.
Sure.
I was concerned, am I going to be accused of some kind of harassment or discrimination for really going after the, hey, behavior, neighbors are having a problem with you, blah, blah, blah,
sure.
Outside of the formal eviction process. And one of the things you mentioned leading up to this was, did we end that call with a kind of an agreed to disagree resolution? And I think that's a good way to describe it. The code enforcement officer that I was talking to, I understand that she didn't write the law.
Right.
Her job is to, oversee that things go according to the law. And so I had to kind of bite my tongue a little bit and understand, okay, I know that it's not your fault.
Right.
But what if this, and what if that, and what if this? And, she talked me through it, and certainly I walk away from that with some list of things that I would change if I was in charge.
If given the opportunity, yes. Yeah. Our previous podcast, Housing Matters, I spoke to Caitlin Jackson, who I know works at Williams Kastner, and we talked about the Housing Justice Project and kind of the current state of evictions at the King County level specifically. And how there's just a huge backlog. As you mentioned, this case you're working on may take up to a year. It could take up to a year. Do you think there's sort of a kind of long-term solution to the problem? Do we need more money for more commissioners, or how do you kind of see that going?
Sure. There's a big story about this in the Times a couple days ago.
Yes. Yep.
After reading that story, the first thing that I think of is, okay, whatever money is funding the housing justice project, they're trying to keep people from losing their home because they can't afford it.
Right.
So we're paying all this money to the attorneys.
Yes.
Instead of using the money to pay the rent that is owed. And once it gets paid, there's no more eviction to be had.
What a concept.
What a crazy concept. So, no, I don't think funding an outfit like the Housing Justice Project makes any sense at all, especially for non-payment cases.
Sure.
Now, if they want to handle discrimination cases, things of that nature, then I think there's a place for that. But the non-payment cases are a no-brainer. Is the backlog because they don't have enough judges? Is that what you're asking?
If you do think that that's the case, in the Times article you spoke to, they seem to me to almost to admit flat out that they are purposely slowing things down as well. So I don't know that it's just the number of commissioners, but
I can't prove this, but I've heard Caitlin talk about this, and I've seen. I've participated in hearings on Zoom so far, and I've observed other cases. This didn't happen in mine. But I think there's definitely something to the idea that the judges are pushing these timelines out, and they are allowing the argument that, oh, so-and-so was confused and we need another 6 months to figure it out. They don't want to be the person responsible for putting so-and-so out on the street.
Sure.
And I think that any judge hearing a case like that in the current environment might be fearing for some kind of retaliation against them personally if they were to look at a case, it's black and white.
Yep.
Yes, this eviction stands, and now they get attacked on their drive home.
Right.
Or slandered in the newspaper or something. I think there's something there.
Sure. Because speaking with Caitlin, that's sort of how unlawful retainer is supposed to work. She said it's very cut and dry. You go in, did you pay? No. Okay, here's your writ. Bye, we're done. And but as you said, maybe that plays into it. I guess time will tell. But it just seems, when I talk to people, maybe you've heard different, but it just seems to be mostly a King County problem.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah. Pierce County and Snohomish just seem to be, taking care of this a lot more quickly. Other people I've spoken with too, they think that, in the long run, sure, that the tenant gets to stay in their house or their unit or whatever it might be, but they're still racking up that debt. And when the time comes, the repay has to come. And how are they going to be able to do that if they're 8 months out or anything like that? So I don't know that it's necessarily very fair. Or good for the tenant as well.
There's a couple that we have going right now I can think of where, yes, the money owed is a big problem. But I'm just thinking about all the other people who live in the building that have to endure this really bad situation with a disruptive neighbor, and no light at the end of the tunnel for them.
Right.
Let alone the bills that are racking up for our client.
Right.
And we're talking a lot about evictions here, and I think it's worth saying, and I want to definitely be on record that we definitely view it as a last resort.
Yep.
We try everything that we possibly can to keep this from actually happening, because it goes on someone's record. If we've reached the point of no return, we will file for an eviction.
Yep.
But we really try to avoid it.
7 years, just like a bankruptcy. But as you said, I think that's the nice thing about small housing providers or property management companies. that you have the relationships with your tenants, and if somebody calls you and says, "Hey, I'm having a hard time. Can we work something out short term?" Sure.
Yeah.
If you're living in an apartment building that's owned by a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has its headquarters in New York City or something, I don't know that you're going to be able to talk something out
Everybody's just
like
a
that.
number on a spreadsheet,
Right.
in that situation.
The relationship's not there, and I think I wish more legislators and lawmakers would take that into account when they pass new rules and policies and ordinances that make it so much harder for the not multi-billion-dollar corporations to operate because you push those people out of the market, and that's all that people are left with. Speaking also of that Seattle Times article and a couple other news outlets actually have reached out to RHA, Crosscut, and a couple others. Speaking of the uptick in eviction filings, especially when you look at the numbers, October compared to April, it's almost double in King County. And so, for someone working in your industry, do you believe the major driving cause of that is refilings because maybe something wasn't properly filed, or do you think that's maybe COVID rental assistance expiring over the last summer? Any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, from a overhead view, I would have to imagine that it's people hadn't been paying for some amount of time.
Sure.
And now they've tried to work it out. The option to file for an eviction now exists. That was off the table for a couple years.
Right.
And so I have to imagine that there's just some buildup there, and people are doing it now because they can.
They can.
Not that they want to.
Of course not. No.
And I think that's really important point.
Yep.
But I have to imagine that we've got a handful of them ourselves. We tried to work it out, not going anywhere.
Yep.
The only option that we have is to file that thing.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I think that's where a lot of people are finding themselves.
Yeah. Because as you said, it is the last resort.
I can't tell you how many times a couple of these people, I promise, sign the payment plan that we offer them. Very extended payment plan, by the way.
Yeah.
Never see a dime. Yeah.
And I hear that talking to other small rental houses. Maybe they own a house or two or something, and I hear that same story. It's, man, I tried to work it out with these people. I know they're having some trouble, and we sign a payment agreement, and maybe I get $1,000 or something from them, and then I don't hear from them again, and then unfortunately we have to go to this next step. So should be noted, I think, too, that as you said, evictions are a last resort, and overall compared to the previous decade or so, they're still at a low. I mean, they were higher pre-pandemic, and even with the kind of upswing that they've had this year, still below pre-pandemic numbers. So I think that definitely is a number that should be taken into account. So we've talked a lot about confrontational relationships with landlords, but for the most part, it's a wonderful relationship and personal, and you get to know your landlord, and the tenant gets to know their landlord. Can you talk a little bit about that type of relationship?
Yeah. Gosh, that's like, I don't know if we talk about it very much around here, but it kind of feels like it's the unspoken number one priority.
Yeah.
Right? Like we are, as a property management company, our client is the landlord. Sometimes they live in Australia or Japan, and we hardly ever talk to them.
Right.
Our relationship is really with the tenant.
Yep.
We see them. We physically see them more often. We probably talk to them more often because we need to share information about the prepping for the weather.
Sure.
Or they've got a maintenance issue, of course. So we don't want to have a confrontational relationship with them. We want them to feel really good about where they're living, and I want them to be super happy with us. A testimonial for our company from a client is great. Yep. A testimonial from a tenant is even better.
Yep.
And it really is a shame that there's so many people who have this kind of adversarial view of how a landlord tenant dynamic, is supposed to work. It's not supposed to work that way.
No, I feel like if that was what you had to deal with every time you rented a property, I feel like you wouldn't be a property provider or a rental housing provider for very long.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, we have clients who send Christmas gifts to their tenants, things like that.
Yeah.
We want people to be happy. So I think it's, I can't speak for everyone at RHA, of course, but I think that is also a very high priority within the organization and most, if not all, of its members.
Yep.
I think it's important that as an industry, as members, as housing providers, we continue to kind of push that talking point.
100%.
We've gotten a lot into there's this big behemoth mega corporate landlord based in New York,
Yep.
and then there's our clients, our members,
Yep.
And there's a difference.
Absolutely.
And talking about the benefits to the tenant experience when they have the fortune to interact with someone like us.
Yep.
Honestly, I believe that. As opposed to a nameless, faceless, maybe even a robot, right?
Robocall, yeah.
They're trying to automate all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. I think it's important that RHA members, other housing providers, take the time and effort to invest in their own best practices, their own education, advocating for themselves. Yep. Some people are very comfortable taking meetings and public speaking and things of that nature. Others aren't. So maybe you make a PAC donation. I don't know.
Yeah.
And help, move the needle with the people who are willing to do that kind of thing.
We're always looking for PAC donations.
Yeah. It did not pay me to say that. But just the reputation, like the more we can reinforce all the positive things that we bring to the table, and I could go down the rabbit hole on this, but there's also this assumption that if you rent your home as opposed to owning your home,
Yep.
you are inherently at some kind of disadvantage.
Right.
You're poor. You are oppressed. Like there's something working against you,
Right.
because you don't own your own home, and that is the case for some people, but not everyone. And I think it's really important to tell the story that a lot of the tenants that we work with, they don't want to own a home.
Sure.
I personally, in the last year at my house, I've had to do a crawl space clean out. I've had to have my furnace fixed. It gets very expensive.
Yep.
And so as a renter, what your monthly payment is going to be.
That's it.
Your taxes don't go up. Okay, once a year you might have a rent increase. You might not.
Yep.
But you're not going to get blindsided with a new water heater or something like
Nope.
that. So, or a roof replacement. There's $40,000 right there.
Right now. Yeah.
So a lot of people have very intentionally made that choice.
Yep.
And if they have money to invest elsewhere, they do it elsewhere.
Yep.
And then we also see a lot of people who know that they're only coming to the Seattle area for
Short time.
year and a half. Okay, we're working on this project for SpaceX, and we're gonna be back to where we came from in Tennessee, year and a half from now.
Yep.
So it doesn't make any sense for us to buy a house.
No.
We have 4 kids. We want them to be in a good school. Okay,
Yep.
so we need that. We need that big house in a nice neighborhood.
Yep.
That's what works for us.
Right.
And through all ladders of the housing, or all rungs of the housing ladder, from big families to single occupants, all the different price points,
Right.
all the different neighborhoods, those options need to be out there for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the repair thing. Yeah. I have several people, my age, like mid 30s, and that's their exact point. They're like, I don't know if I even want to own a house. They hear the stories from me of, I had to fix you said the water heater, or I put in some new very average carpet this year, and it was like $4,000. Very average carpet in a couple of rooms. And you put it all adds up. You got to do new flooring at some point or whatever, and you never have to worry about that. I know you get your return on investment in theory when you sell, or
if you hold it long enough, it'll work out for you.
Right. Yeah. But as you said, if you're only going to be here for a couple of years, doesn't really make sense.
If you have to be able to handle the stress too.
Yeah.
And even if it's not like, okay, you're giving up this long-term investment by rent. Okay, that's one thing. But the years it takes to get there, do you want to be stressed out that whole time? And a lot of people have chosen, no, I don't want to be stressed out with the roof replacement.
Right. Our first house, our oldest, my daughter was, I think, 6 months old, and it was a 1915 house in North Tacoma. Sewer line collapsed.
Yeah.
Like six months old. We didn't have the money at the time, just to be honest with you. So
did you have to jackhammer through the driveway?
They did one little section actually. Yeah. But I mean, we had to do, because it's the homeowners. We had to go take out a HELOC, and we had to pool money together. Even in, I think this was 2018. Even in 2018 dollars, it was 12 G's.
Yeah.
To redo the sewer line. And as a renter, that's something that you would never have to. I mean, it would still,
you have to live through it.
Right, you'd have to live through it, which would be unfortunate, but you're not paying for it.
Yeah.
And that was a steep curve there. That was fun.
So have we talked people out of home ownership pretty effectively? I think we did a pretty good job.
Have you heard about those interest rates too?
Yeah. On that note, gosh, it would be so powerful if housing providers who do have awesome relationships with their tenants can get their tenants involved in these conversations.
Absolutely.
As well. I think it'd be a very powerful testimony.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. As you said, a tenant testimonial speaks volumes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thanks again for taking the time to listen to the Rental Housing Association of Washington's podcast, Housing Matters. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Cory Brewer. Go ahead and click like or subscribe, and that way you'll be notified every time we release a new episode, whether that's on any of the popular podcast platforms or if you prefer the video version on YouTube. If you have a topic that you believe should be covered in a future episode of Housing Matters, please feel free to email at me at my email, chjalseth@rhawa.org. Please feel free to email me if you have any suggestions for topics, or if you think I should be diving deeper into something that is affecting our collective industry together. The views expressed in episodes of RHAWA's Housing Matters podcast do not necessarily represent the views and policies of the Rental Housing Association of Washington. Formal legal advice and review is recommended prior to selection and use of this information. RHAWA does not represent your selection or execution of this information as appropriate for your specific circumstance. The material contained and represented herein, although obtained from reliable sources, is not considered legal advice or to be used as a substitution for legal counsel. Copyright 2023.